Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here representing Lamington Group as their Head of Sustainability and as moderator for the Retrofitting Commercial How Do We Reach Net Zero Standards, with a wonderful panel who've come from Foster & Partners, Buro, Happold, Canary Wharf Group, Seaforth Land Holdings and Derwent London. So we have architects and developers, operators here today, just for you. So today's session is going to run for about 40 minutes, with 10 minutes for questions afterwards, please. So please hold on to your questions, and we'll have time for you after everybody has spoken. Thanks very much. So right now, reaching net zero in the built environment has to be the principal goal for all commercial asset owners in order to attract and maintain investor interest. For example, UK GBC calculates that nearly 25% of the built environment's carbon footprint in the UK comes from the energy needed to heat, power and operate commercial buildings. And reducing that carbon burden is our call to action. The Carbon Risk Real Estate Monitor, CREM, has a tool that's been created to assess the carbon risks associated with operational emissions and retrofit actions on global commercial real estate properties. It's a helpful tool that can support companies in assessing the required reduction in carbon emissions at asset level. But getting practical about the issue, it's clear that retrofitting is vital to help reduce carbon emissions in the commercial property sector, but it's seen as a very high CapEx outlay. So asking the panel, I'm going to ask them first to introduce themselves, and then we're going to get some questions to start a lively discussion and debate. So firstly, John Davies, Head of Sustainability at Derwent London.
Good afternoon, everybody. Is this as weird for you as it is for me?
Anna Woodeson, Director of Sustainability at Buro, Happold.
Hello, everyone. Yep, that's me.
Doretta Bevilacqua, Gilkes, Partner and Architect at Foster & Partners.
Hi, hello, everyone.
Tyler Goodwin, CEO and Founder, Seaforth Land Holdings.
Hello.
And finally, Tom Venner, Chief Development Officer of Canary Wharf Group. Okay, to start us off, in your experience, what types of retrofitting do you see as the most efficient and effective ways to bring down operational carbon? That's for the in-use phase of property management. Over to you, Doretta.
Yeah, can you hear me? Good. Yeah, I'd like to respond to that one. Personally, I think it is mainly adaptive reuse, because but let's explain first what adaptive reuse is, which is reusing an existing building for a purpose other than which it was built in the first place. It's challenging, but it definitely has the key for increasing the number of retrofits in London, especially because it is still very, very low. Retrofitting the built environment, I would say anywhere in the world, it is a challenge for investors, for building owners, but it's also a great opportunity, and that's probably why we're all here to talk about this topic now. So which are the benefits of a retrofit? The reduction in embodied carbon that saves you from, knocking down the existing building and creating the new one. So there's a big reduction in embodied carbon there. A reduction in operational carbon as well by improving the existing system, and also a reduction in energy bills. So ultimately there is also a benefit to the occupier and to the tenants. In terms of adaptive reuse in particular, it's important that we measure the building performance throughout the life of the building itself, and also understand and learn from the existing building before we even touch it, to see if there is still mileage left in the systems currently present in the building in questions. And then also prioritize the occupant and well-being and health, as well as that of the building. I mean, in all of this, as I said, turning a challenge into an opportunity for finance is definitely going to be helpful. especially for, I would say, the kind of smaller investors, because this kind of, I'd say, this strategy of buy it, fix it, sell it now also has the sustainable element to it, because it has been proven to add benefits, also financial benefits to the property, attracting obviously better tenants and more investment in itself. But I'd like someone else to say something too.
Hello, everybody. I think when we talk about retrofit, we often think about redeveloping buildings, but there's a huge amount we can do whilst buildings in operation. So I think in this conversation today, we want to talk about buildings in operation and their abilities to redevelop and how we approach it. I think never before have landlords and occupiers been so focused on the operational efficiency of their building. Often on visitor tours to Canary Wharf, it's one of the first questions that potential customers were asked: what is the operational efficiency of this building? And there are so many major things you can do, but actually there's an even longer list of really small interventions that can make a really significant difference. The light bulbs you use, the programming of your BMS, you've got windows automatically opening. You have all sorts of things that you can do, every customer can do to minimise their usage of energy. And I think we should not lose focus of those small incremental changes that we could all make to our building, either as landlord or as an occupier, or just as an end user. Do you know what I'm saying? That little bit of energy, and all that will take us one more step closer to net zero.
Can I just add some figures to that as well? So in a recent UK GBC report, they were looking at the kind of optimisation stage that you've just been talking about. Being able to save about 20%. That's felt right for years, actually. And then a kind of further 15% for light retrofit. And overall, about 60 to 65 for deep retrofit. So those are the kind of things. And I think what all these measures should be looked at really carefully in relation to phasing. You can get really, really incredibly badly wrong with a retrofit if you do things in the wrong order, as I'm sure you will know. But in a way, the optimization stage allows you to do the first, demand reduction, and then you can start splitting the work up after that.
I'd just add, if we really oversimplify it, if you think about doing a retrofit and you make your building electric, and then you put in green leases and you require all of your tenants to buy green power, your building is a net zero building. So some of this is just as simple as explaining to your tenants that, your service charge, the occupancy cost might be up a little bit because we're going for green power, but now you've got a net zero building. I don't think it's as simple as that in the context of how do we educate tenants to reduce their need for power, and the more that people are reducing the actual power requirements in the grid, the more availability there is for green power. And I do believe that part of this, in terms of how we educate tenants to change their behavior, a big one here in our buildings, and all we do is refurb. We've done around 600,000 square feet of refurb in Zone 1. London is openable windows, and educating people about the great advantage of having a moderate climate like London, where there are months on end where you can just open the windows and turn off ventilation and air conditioning to reduce your carbon footprint. That is the standard, by the way, in Germany and other parts of Europe already.
Great, some great points there. So I'm actually going to focus on John, Tom and Tyler now as the developers on the panel. What factors do you think are affecting your choices in relation to the types of retrofitting in terms of the size and the uses of the properties that you're looking at?
I think that's meant for you to for you that you either you get spoiler for your head. It's very true. Something work better. I saw this nodding head, please. That's right. I mean, it's like everything. It developing so again, adding there's a word so that way to end up again. I'd be not with it. But that's again.
All right. No. Works for me.
Does it work for you? Does that work?
Yes.
Still there. We're developing a product ultimately, and it's got to be the right product in the right place, and ultimately delivered well. It's got to be a quality product. So regardless of whether we're looking at that through an architectural lens or we're looking at that through any other type of lens, whether this is an environmental one in this case and looking at energy efficiency, you have to treat each each in its own right and each with its own merits, because not every building, as has already been mentioned, is the same. We're dealing with various different vintages in terms of architecture. And funnily enough, one of the things that we often notice is when people say it's a 1960s building or it's a 1970s building, actually it's not. It's 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s buildings all rolled into one, because people have been inside and done works over a period of time. Occupiers have been in and done works over a period of time. So you get all sorts of stuff that you find. And actually that makes it very difficult to pare it back to its bare bone constituent parts and undertake what one would deem to be a energy efficient retrofit. And the point that Anna made, which I thought was quite interesting, is that not all retrofits are good retrofits. You can actually go really, really wrong thinking that you're doing something really, really right. And I think that's something else to bear in mind, that simply looking at an asset, retaining it, doesn't necessarily mean you've done the right thing for it. So I think for us, very much it's a case of looking at where we are, what we're looking at in terms of a property, and what the best solution is for that property.
Tyler?
Great. Let's start with a dirty word here, which is profit. And I wrote an article a couple of weeks ago in the NLA on this, because there's a real problem that we're not talking about the importance of delivering profitable schemes in today's market. There's a significant regulatory risk evolving right now, and we've seen some boroughs that are changing their policies and requiring 20% of the gross internal area of a refurb to go into affordable offices, which is great in concept, but no developer has an extra 20 or 30% margin lying around. It's just not happening. So if we want to see great refurbishments happen, then we all need to remember that to create this virtual cycle. And we're delivering refurbs and beautiful refurbs, and we're going to town. They're incredibly expensive, and in this last 3 years since the start of COVID, we've seen construction costs go up 50%. That's according to PCIS. It's not an arbitrary number. We've seen interest rates, the cost of borrowing, double, and we see policy inflating as well, making it more and more difficult, which means that we can't attract new institutional capital to encourage them to invest in this space and invest more, because refurbishment is harder. It's easier to knock a building down and build new. Meanwhile, viability assessments, there's no difference between a refurb and a new build with regards to the inherent risk associated with a viability assessment, with a refurb. So I would say profit is really number one. If we can do that, then that's going to, if we can all remember that it's important to kind of prime the pump and create more profitability, then we'll attract more investment, because there definitely is demand for refurbished buildings.
Yeah, well, London's the most expensive place to do business now in terms of construction. So if you think about it, everything has got to fall in line, and perversely enough, in some instances, it's
That's your cue down, David, to me, I think. We don't have a choice. I mean, there's a financial imperative, there's a societal imperative, and an environmental imperative. We have to do this. Somebody gave me a stat that 80% of the buildings in 2050 already exist today. We have to find a route to give a second or third or fourth life to our buildings. And this is nothing new, guys. Walk around Fitzrovia. Those houses were often built as residential properties. They were converted to offices. Some of them would be converted back again. This stuff has happened before. I walked around on one of these stages and said, nobody's ever converted a really large office building into residential before. And some clever dick at Elmer Counter said, yes, we have. Look at Centre Point. But it can be done, and it has to be done. But as Tyler said, and he's absolutely spot on, it is complicated and is expensive. So government has to pull some levers to make it a bit easier. There are some regulatory levers and there are some fiscal levers which we could talk about. But fundamentally, when you are approaching the repurposing of, let's start with office buildings, because it tends to be office buildings in the first instance, into an alternative use. As some of you will know, at Canary Wharf, we have a couple of these on our books right now that we are looking at. They're really significant million square foot plus buildings. And I think we do have a route map, and that route map is based in the circular economy. It is about reusing as much of that existing building as you possibly can, with that end game to be the most environmentally efficient building that you could possibly get to. So there are certain things you can't, but there are absolutely things you can. And we know how much embodied carbon there is in structure. We know how much embodied carbon there is in aluminium and steel. Those are the things we have to prioritise. And where we can't prioritise, we have to think how they can be broken down into their constituent parts and reused on the buildings. We have that environment economic imperative to do that, because actually that is the only route to financial viability, is to leave as much of the building in situ as you possibly can. I'm a pretty old-fashioned developer, and the old-fashioned development metrics used to say if you were doing a refurbishment scheme, you typically had to find 30 to 35% additional floor area to get yourself viable. That's what's paying for the rest of the refurbishment. In repurposing, often you can't, or you don't want to find more area. I mean, your building is simply big enough as it is, and it isn't suited to alternative uses by simply making the floor plates bigger or putting more floors on it. So you have to become smarter. You have to become more focused on putting less in and taking less out, because that is the only route to viability. And just as Tyler said, if this stuff isn't viable, then we are going to get to this stranded asset territory. We're going to find buildings that customers do not want to occupy, they don't want to live in, because they're not the highest environmental standards. So we've just had a panel on that. They don't want to work in it because they expect the highest economic standards. That's the best way to the end game, which is to attract the best talent. And so we have to find a way through this. I do believe the technology has to play a part of it, but fundamentally this is going to come down to economics. This is going to make it as affordable, quick and easy to deliver. That's the route to viability.
Well, first and foremost, what the customer wants, because that's underlying all of that is ultimately about you guys as occupiers, and what do you want, and what ultimately would you put your hands in your pockets for and sign a lease on. And that's ultimately what we're reacting to more so than anything else, and something that actually we need to get better at as a industry. Property is not necessarily as customer focused as it once was, or indeed ever was. You look at FMCG or anything else like that, everything is about the customer and about the product. So I think that's something that maybe we need to learn, not just about how our appraisals work, which we do all day long. We know the numbers, we can tell you the numbers inside out, and we can tell you how much everything costs, but ultimately it won't get let unless somebody wants it.
Thank you. So if we start thinking about qualifying and quantifying the performance of buildings, I'd like to ask the panel, what certification standard or standards does your organisation seek to demonstrate excellence in a building's operational performance? Who would like to start?
Can I kick off from the engineering practice? We look at many certification systems. BREEAM, Neighbours. In terms of operational energy, and I think in a way Neighbours is set up really well to measure this. I would say though that in a way we're all calibrated to think about Neighbours in terms of new build, I would say. Most of our building stock is about two-star, three-star, Neighbours rating at the moment, right? Sorry? Yeah, beg your pardon, out of 6. And so, when we're talking about new builds and we're talking very ambitiously about kind of 5.5 stars or whatever, great, and we're all imagining that. And I think the tricky bit really in the retrofit market is actually we're probably only aiming for maybe 4 stars in some of these areas, but that's still good and that's still the right decision. It's not always sensible to go as full on as you can in retrofit. So maybe in a way moving forward we need a slightly more better calibrated system and understanding. And I think that will come because we'll be doing a lot more projects, we'll be benchmarking, we'll be measuring, and we'll be able to over the next few years understand much more clearly what kind of percentage improvements we need to achieve and what is possible. I mean, it's worth pointing out on a pessimistic note that at the moment that people are not achieving the percentage reductions when they carry out their retrofit projects that are needed to get us to where we need to be. That's quite important, I think. But that's a negative point to end on.
So on the positive, we've been talking in the practice about stranded asset for a very long time because we know it's an issue. We have been doing portfolio analysis for some of our clients. We have been giving the smaller developers scenarios of how to best approach the retrofit. We figured out that there is a lot of unknowns for our clients. And sorry, but I need to talk about the client's perspective because they're important for us. there are a lot of unknowns and uncertainties and fear, to be fair. So mapping the scenarios for them has been something that we've been doing more and more, and that unlocked not only finance access to them, but also unlocked a bit of the kind of drive and motivation to wanting to step into a retrofit. And technology has helped a lot. We have developed softwares in-house that allows us to map transitional risks. Also, we're collaborating with companies that are able to quantify what that means in terms of expenditure for a client. And we've also started doing simulations of what would the building look and do in terms of performance should you decide to do that move first before another. Anyway, so on the bright side, I would say that I think architects and the industry and developers as well are working a lot towards trying to give more knowledge to everyone, so that more security, so that they feel better about taking.
And your clients ask you for more of it?
They are, but they're afraid to do that too because they think it might come at a cost as well. But we can give that cost too. So I think, we're all working towards the same goal, to be honest. Obviously, time spent on things will need to be remunerated, but there is a lot more demand for that. And we've seen clients that weren't willing to even embark on a sustainability conversation to begin with, actually adding sustainability targets to their brief, so changing the original brief to a no one. So, yeah, I think it's working.
Change is happening.
Just a really quick one, to that is a positive point, okay? The other really important thing is that the industry has completely shifted over the last few years, thank goodness, to measuring the right things. And I think that's important to acknowledge, that we're now measuring EUI, so we're measuring actual energy. We've moved away from any of the building regulations nonsense. And so I think that's a really positive. Whatever certification we go for, whatever flavour, if we're actually measuring the right metrics, that's pretty important, right?
Yeah, agreed. And the only thing I would say, challenge any benchmark that you're given. Look under the surface and try to really understand how it's measured. And Neighbours is a great one. We're doing a 1968 grade 2 listed building to Neighbours 4.5 stars that I think we can get to 6 because Neighbours was developed in Australia. It's designed after this closed building system. We've got 30% opening windows, exposed concrete. We'll be doing thermal loading of the structure, so remote opening of windows when the temperature is below, but also working with customers to help inform them about how to use their building better and how to, as a community, reduce our operational carbon. And so I would say the same with, BREEAM. This is going to be the first grade 2, or the first listed BREEAM outstanding office building in the UK. 1968, we were told by everybody it's impossible. So don't believe what you're being told by consultants, because people are afraid of failure. Sorry, but people are afraid of failure. Yeah. So the point is, kind of fight back, and if you believe you can do it or push the envelope, be willing to push the envelope, because it's in everybody's benefit. And suddenly you set a new benchmark that then everybody else can kind of work towards.
Great, thank you. Could I? Both Doretta and Tyler mentioned stranded assets there, and I think it's important now to focus on that, as we see the buildings have a very long lifetime, as long as they're kept operationally sound, but we've now got the net zero target to account for. So would you like to introduce your view as to what strategic intent to achieve lower operational carbon and lower embodied carbon for all of your developments? Would you like to contribute something so that the audience can understand what the prospect of stranded assets might mean to your company?
It just simply can't happen. I mean, the idea that you leave an asset to rot, I think, is just completely unacceptable on so many levels, as I told you earlier. I mean, the most obvious one is financially it's nuts. But I just don't believe that you have to leave a stranded asset. But it's certainly not the sort of assets that we hold. They tend to be 25 to 30 years old and going to probably their second phase of life. The idea that you would give up on an asset, on a building that's 25 years old, is insane. It simply can't be possible. So we have to find the way, and there are ways, and it is being done, and it has been done. So I think there is simply no excuse. We have to find a way. Of course, there will be exceptions that we have to get to with regulation. There are some really complicated listed buildings, probably the sort of the Tyler's talking about, the thing that Lord I don't have to deal with, but that are really, really, really challenging. But it still can be done with ingenuity, with imagination, and taking a view on the financial performance. There are many strands to this conversation. And I know Tyler will come to later about. There's an occupier strand, there is a developer strand, there is an investor strand. And these assets, I think there is a danger that they become orphaned by the investment market because they said the course to them being lettable is so challenging. However, I believe it is totally doable. And we should set ourselves really high standards on a really high bar to exceed if we're going to demolish some of these buildings, because our buildings can last, like this one, for decades and decades and decades and decades and decades, and we have to get over this warranty hurdle of, well, the warranties have expired, so therefore the thing's going to fall down. Nuts. Actually, let's believe in our buildings, let's developers to stand behind our buildings, and the investment market will follow us.
Great. Any other comments from the panel?
Yeah, I mean, Tom's exactly right. It's not like we're going to be just sort of, jettisoning, swathes of our portfolio because they no longer meet a particular standard. Anybody with a significant portfolio will be looking through it and saying, right, okay, what's at risk? You take a very clear-cut risk-based approach, and what do we need to do? It's also a flip side to that as well, in terms of there will come a point where the skills base that is associated with retrofit will also have to liven up, smarten up. At the moment, the skills base is very much predicated around new build. So all of the codes, all of the standards, everything that the sort of the design world sort of tends to function under is very much skewed towards that part. So we are going to reach a point where certain assets, people are going to be scratching their heads because it's going to be difficult to do, theoretically as well as practically. And also we have, here in the UK, we do have to tackle the issue of heritage and veteran buildings as well, which present their own unique set of challenges that we'll have to deal with. But as Tom said, we shouldn't be giving up on that. And likewise, as developers, as investors, you want to maintain your income stream. So it doesn't make sense. However, there will be opportunities out there for other types of organisations to take advantage of what other people might not see as an opportunity. So it is a little bit of swings and roundabouts, but in the same token, you can't use that as your first and your foremost.
Yeah, just wanted to add quickly that there are about 77% of commercial properties sit below the EPC-B rating. So I think it's just worth concentrating on that size of the problem. We're also having quite a London-centric conversation here. Sorry, but we are. And, I think the issue of stranded assets in areas where there isn't the value and there isn't the, also perhaps it's just a lot more challenging. So don't think about that.
Yeah, on that latter point, I think it's a great opportunity if you think about housing and the desperate need for housing. Policy needs to kind of jump on board and recognize that some of these buildings in this new world of how we work and live are not really the highest and best use as offices, so they should be adaptive reuse. Some people have been critical of this permitted development right policy, but the fact is there are projects being approved right now within 56 days that are going to go forward and deliver housing. It's not perfect, but it's better than no housing right now, and housing starts are down 74%. So we need something to kickstart that. What I would say, on a very optimistic note, I've got 2 Gen Zs at home, at university, and the next generation of talent is keenly aware of the climate crisis, and really demand is changing, and this next generation they've got values and purpose, and they're measuring their companies that they want to work for based on their commitments to climate-based targets. And so demand will change if all of you go back to the office and ask your employer, hey, why aren't we in a refurb building instead of a new building, right? And that will come with this next generation because there's already this democratization that's happening in terms of leasing decisions. It's no longer the CEO and the CFO making the call. It's the CEO and CFO with head of HR and a panel of employees, and they're starting to understand the difference. We let one building, a refurb, 1971, nondescript building. It's called Bleeding Heart Yard. That is now something really beautiful. That it's shrouded in this neo-Edwardian facade, and we've stripped out all the layers in the inside to expose the clay pot ceilings and expose brick, and it's authentic. And that authentic is really important to this next generation. It's what's driving, sustainability and authenticism to, secondhand clothing, going from being a tiny part of the market to probably surpassing fast fashion by 2030.
Great, yeah, so that brings us back to the circular economy again, doesn't it, at that point? One of the last questions to the panel would actually be, what signal do you think that your attitude towards retrofitting is going to have with potential investors in the commercial real estate environment?
Do you want me to kick off on that?
Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
please.
Hopefully it's a bit of a right. This is the direction we need to be taking type move. I certainly hope that there's a lot of great work out there that not just our 3, 4 or 5 companies are doing stroke supporting. I think there's a lot of great work that's happening out there, and hopefully that sort of proves the point that it can be done. I think that's like with so many things, you need your base cases, you need your examples, you need clear-cut examples of where client, finance, developer, occupier all coinciding with one, and sort of say, right, this is what good looks like, and this is what we want. It's interesting when I go back to Anna's point about in London, that's a very easy conversation to have actually. We step outside the metropolitan area, we get out into the regions, it's an exceptionally difficult conversation to have because value is valued differently, and the expectations are different. But hopefully there's enough of what's happening here that can be dragged out and sort of utilised up and down, whether it's England, whether it's Wales, whether it's Scotland, over in Northern Ireland. Because interestingly enough, a lot of it gets copied in Europe, funnily enough, because we look out across into mainland Europe and assume that a lot of good practice comes from there. Actually, it's coming from here in the UK. So I like to think of hopefully that we can set some good exemplars and set us on the right path.
Lead the way in some ways, yes.
Yeah.
Any other comments regarding the investor interest?
Can I just make a comment on the investor side? I think one thing you kind of missed talking about is the enormous impact of investment, the kind of criteria, the ESG criteria from the funders. I wouldn't go so far as to say that bankers are going to save the world, but I think that there is a big shift in the way that the kind of how onerous the requirements are aligned to the investment that's coming into the market, right? And that is really over the last 5 years, would you say? Like massive difference.
Yeah, it's what's facilitating the stranded asset It's exactly that lenders are just saying, unless you have a path to green, is the term, we don't want to refinance the asset. And so it is putting a lot of pressure on owners of assets. And unfortunately, in some cases, it's against a backdrop with falling leasing demand, all right, and rising construction costs and repurposing costs. That is fundamentally testing viability. And that's where, obviously we should be taking a real active stand towards adaptive reuse.
Risks, plain and simple, at the end of the day. I know was someone in the audience is going to ask a question on that. I couldn't say who.
Any other comments regarding the investor viewpoint?
I would just say, in terms of development, the job is to overcome risk to deliver, as we've talked about now. And there is, as was touched on earlier, a massive skills gap around the world about capability. And teams and consultants tooling up, experimenting, trying new things, being creative is part of the answer to this. And it's not just going to be one development company, Lyde, Tyler's, or Derwent doing this, but it's actually going to be a collective effort. And so I'd say the call out here is for consultants to tool up, for architects to tool up, to engineering firms to tool up, and to try new things. That's going to be your way through. But the investors expect us to find a pathway, a lowest risk possible path to deliver the returns. And that's where our challenge is to find that best path for the individual building.
That's great. Thank you. Doretta.
Yeah, no, just a point on the collaborative efforts, because communication isn't great at the moment across the different industries, including the finance industry. So forums like this are a great thing. So yes, together, I think we definitely can get there, but having more opportunities to talk to each other, compare notes, and to agree what to do next. I think that the thing we should be doing is the next right thing, wherever that leads us. Sometimes you don't know exactly where you're going, but that would be the first step to do, the next right thing.
And pioneers in this space should be celebrated so that other people can be educated and become aware of what's going on. So a final question actually for the panel. I think we've had quite an interesting discussion here, but if you could make a specific request or call to action to the audience attending this Innovation Zero event, what would it be? What action or engagement do you believe could have a meaningful impact beyond the event? Let's go with Anna.
Okay, I think I'm going to ask everyone to fully comprehend how big the retrofit challenge is. And, imagine if we had a circular economy that actually allowed us to deliver low carbon retrofits. We're developing a retrofit project. We can take our windows to a repurposing centre down the road. We've got material stores all over the city. We've got an infrastructure that supports retrofit. We've got a whole training programme. We talked about designers and consultants, but actually builders, contractors, all the people that need to understand, how to actually build retrofit projects. And imagine if we also had a policy backdrop and the importance of campaigning for that policy backdrop. VAT needs to be realigned. We've got need minimum energy efficiency standard. All the, really important policies to kind of support this vision of a proper industry supportive retrofit world, should we say. Okay, it's just a small ask, just let's start with that one.
Thank you. John.
What she said. No, I think the one specific request that I would make is, if you are working in this field, try whatever your role is in that, is try and support that transition if you can. I know it's easier said than done, but whatever your role might be, whether you're designing it, building it, financing it, try and treat that as the first port of call as opposed to the next port of call.
Tyler?
Yeah, as I said, I think you have to start asking yourselves, why are we not in a refurb? And it's not because take your medicine. Actually, these refurb buildings are more experiential, they're unique, and they're special buildings. So it forces us as developers to be more creative in celebrating the elements of these buildings that are so special. But it starts with demand. And as demand changes, and as you start asking the question, look, why are we going into a new build instead of a refurb? You're going to see that you have a lot more choices out there as well. And the exemplar will continue to rise.
Doretta?
Yeah, for me is never lose sight of the target and don't stand still.
I said before this panel that I was going to nick some of Tyler's ideas, and I'll nick that one. I think it's an exceptionally good one. My addition was my call to arms to the consultants who are amongst you, is to say, don't wait for a developer to come to you and offer you an instruction to help retrofitting your building. Because there are queues out the door of people who want to have a go at this. Have a go on your own time, experiment, come up with ideas, be creative, approach us. If you've got an idea for a building, great, knock on the door. I'm sure that the door is always open to have those conversations. But be creative and help us solve the problem rather than waiting for somebody else to do it for you.
Okay, well, thank you all very, very much indeed for answering those questions. It's very interesting today. Thank you. We're going to open up to the floor now. So we've got a roving mic with the lovely Sam, and we've got plenty of questions. Please tell us who you are, as well as ask the question, obviously.
Hello, speaker and Marcel. I'm a KTP associate with Warwick University and a lighting company, and my question is about servitisation as a solution with regards to OPEX versus CAPEX. I heard you speaking about risk and the costs associated with retrofitting, but if there was a servitisation solution that would reduce the need for CAPEX, do you think that might help people's decision to go with retrofits over the new?
Panel?
And I will admit that's the first time I've heard the term servitization. Anyone here?
Oh,
You're talking about rebalancing, right? Which makes total sense.
What I mean by servitisation is rather than a product, to serve as a service. So Rolls-Royce offer power by the hour for their engines, for their jet engines, right? So lighting could be offered as a service. Other functions in the building, rather than buying new or going to landfill, retrofit it, upgrade it, but then offer it as a service to encourage the retrofit solution over the need for big CapEx. That's what I'm worried.
I suppose, yes, in terms of would we understand what that is? Of course we would, yeah. And as you say, you can buy lighting per lux, you can buy, things per whatever unit of whatever it is. Would that be something that's possible? Of course it's possible. I think the tricky thing about all these as a service type products in real estate, unfortunately, it's got to pass the ownership and the flexibility tests. So the asset isn't always, in somebody's ownership for an indefinite period of time. So how does that work when you're looking at future owners? How does it work with cycles of refit? How does it work with a lease? If all of that can align through, then as a service should, in effect, fit quite neatly. At the moment, it's a bit of a square peg in a round hole.
Sorry, can I just add on one thing to that? It's a really brilliant idea as well in relation to operational energy, because when you get a company that's making money from your lights working, they want your lights working. So there's a natural kind of maintenance and there's an inherent service. It's obvious, really.
It's cyclical.
Yeah, it's exactly. Yeah, so it's a great outcome.
Thank you. Other questions? Have you got the mic? Thank you. Oh,
Hi,
they're supposed to choose them.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, it's a question in regards to profit. VAT is still not being lifted off refurbishments, right? And this has been a conversation for a very long time. Who's lobbying to stop that actually going through? And I don't want this to suggest this to anyone, but do we need to stand up when a certain politician is talking today?
We all talk about it all the time. My view is, and I'm a reform banker, VAT is a time value of money issue. You get it back, and it's not. It helps on the margin. I think it's more emblematic of how inequitable that this industry is. That developers building new don't have to pay VAT. We do, but I'd say there are probably bigger challenges that we need to overcome to really focus on profitability. But it's a tool that we should be doing. Everybody talks about it. It comes up at every panel. It just nobody does anything about it.
And all the other taxation that's associated, capital allowances, for example, and majority of properties driven through REIT status, you can't claim the majority of the capital allowances that, say, a regular PLC could, for example. So there's a whole, through the British Property Federation, other channels. I mean, everybody sits down. There's various committees that constantly bang on about you need to adjust the right taxation regime for the right product, etc., and refurb, unfortunately, just gets lumped in as the government sees it under development. So it's at the moment falling on very deaf ears.
Okay, another question. Let's have this lovely lady here. Thank you.
Hi, sorry. I was just wondering, someone mentioned in the previous talk about adaptation, and just wondering if people could touch on whether or not that's being coupled in the finance case in terms of obviously a big risk factor for businesses is flood and the impact on on a lot of your revenue streams from that. And is that being lumped together in the financial case of retrofit and adaptation?
In terms of retrofit, the risk for retrofitting.
So the risk mitigation
Mitigation,
that
yeah.
you can do through a building or do retrofitting with adaptation at the same time.
It's very much on customers' minds and landlords' minds. We are in a dramatically changing climate. Somebody gave me a stat, and I don't know if it's true, so they quote me, is that by 2050, London will have a climate that's equivalent to Barcelona today, which, if it's true, is extraordinary. If it's not, it's still quite a cool fact. So actually, we have to design for that. But that adaptation is how can we use what we have more efficiently to adapt to the climate around us. And that in some parts of the country is flood, in some parts of the country is climate, or whatever it might be. Absolutely. I think we have to get better in our design about being adaptable to the climate that surrounds us. But I must say that tends to mean less rather than more. So the philosophy, even probably 10, 15 years ago, was if you wanted the best office building in London, you had to specify. So it was a race to the highest specification you can get. We are, all landlords, I think, are challenging that tirelessly. We're actually taking stuff out. So, well, actually, if it's 18 degrees or less outside, open the windows so you can actually ventilate your building. So I think it's about less. It's about adapting what you have to make it respond to the climate that you're in. So absolutely.
Also, in terms of climate adaptation, there is an incredible amount of data out there that will help us map climate-related risks or any kind of transitional risks. So there is a lot more knowledge now than we ever had before. So it's on a case-by-case basis that it will be taken into account, but definitely gets evaluated, and it can even be costed. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think in relation to your point about Barcelona, we need to start designing buildings properly for these kind of temperatures. For example, they need to start looking different. If you go to Europe in the middle of summer, people have external blinds. They have external shutters. They have things that prevent solar gain. Why is it that in this country you can't get anyone to put any external blinds in? It's extraordinary. So we need to sort of develop the language of our architecture as well. Basic pragmatic solutions that exist and are being used in other countries, hot countries.
Very good point. One last question from the floor. Let's have that gentleman over there. Thank you.
Hi, I am Abek. You made a quote earlier, and I was like, wait a minute, I've heard that before. That doesn't sound quite right. Someone else said it's the first building, and then I checked again. It was actually yourself that said it on the property podcast, the ESG that you were on recently. Excellent podcast and excellent talk, by the way. And I think within the podcast, which comes to my question as well, I actually had a question for you, but I couldn't ask you for the podcast. It was a lot about leadership within the industry, and you all sitting here, you occupy that space, right? Now, my question is around what technology do you see that's scalable or adaptable across the whole industry, that you guys execute and use very well in your space? You go through all the investor, developer across the industries that we can use, that can be used, and us as lenders can actually take advantage of that and actually understand what's happening in all these commercial properties. That's my question.
Well, one Luddite technology is better communication, because I really do believe that engaging with your tenants and providing constant feedback on how their behavior is reducing their operational carbon footprint is really powerful to adapt people's or change people's behavior. But you do need to start with a smart building and the technology around measuring that in the first place. We also on Space House we've created an algorithm so that the building will default to opening the windows, turning off the ventilation and air conditioning on those days when we recommend that it's just better to do that. The tenant can swipe left and opt out, but instead of saying, hey, would you like to opt into what we think is the better behavior? Now, some tenants will say, look, I'm a trading platform. I just want the same constant environment 24 hours a day. You can't say no, so they get to opt out if they want. But I think communicating, encouraging the right behavior, but you do need the technology with regards to, whether it's a digital twin or other readers that are providing the feedback and giving your algorithm the right sets of input so it can respond accordingly. Anyone else?
Anyone else for a final comment? No? Well, thank you all for your questions. Thank you very, very much to the panel. Would we all put our hands together for a round of applause? Thank you very much indeed.